So that's your final answer? You won't co-sign? Mark's voice was tight, a thin wire of indignation stretched to its breaking point. He stood with his arms crossed over a chest puffed with unearned authority, a posture he'd adopted since moving into my house. My house. The one I built with Eleanor. I looked past him, to my daughter, Clara. She stood by the kitchen island, refusing to meet my gaze, her fingers tracing the veins in the marble countertop I'd had installed last year as a gift for their anniversary. A gift I now saw was just another brick in the foundation of their entitlement. The answer is no, Mark, I said, my voice even. I had just returned from the grocery store, the reusable bags still sitting on the floor by the door, their contents slowly warming. Your boutique coffee roasting venture is a hobby, not a business plan. The bank sees it, and so do I. I will not secure a $200,000 loan against this house for it. Mark scoffed, a sharp, ugly sound. It's not your house anymore, old man. It's our house. We live here. We're building a life here. Clara finally looked up, her eyes pleading. Dad, please! It's important to him. To us. What's important, I said, turning my full attention to my son-in-law, is fiscal responsibility. Something you've yet to demonstrate. That was the moment the wire snapped. Mark's face flushed a deep, mottled red. He took a step toward me, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. You live under our roof. You follow our rules. Clara is my wife. This is my family. You will either do as you're told and support us, or you can get out. It's that simple. Co-sign the loan or pack your things. He looked at Clara, a silent command passing between them. She flinched, then straightened her shoulders. Her voice was a pale echo of his, but the words were her own. He's right, Dad. You have to choose. It's us, or it's you. I looked at the son-in-law who had never held a job for more than 6 months, whose hands were softer than his wife's. I looked at the daughter I'd put through medical school, a debt I was still paying. I had paid for her wedding, for the down payment on their first condo which they'd sold at a loss, and for the last 3 years, I had paid the mortgage, utilities, and taxes on this very house while they lived here, ostensibly to get on their feet. I saw the ultimatum not as a sudden break, but as the inevitable, ugly destination of a long, one-sided journey. A strange calm settled over me. There was no anger, no shock. There was only a profound, clarifying silence in my mind. The endless hum of anxiety about their future, the low-grade resentment at their constant needs, it all just stopped. I had spent 40 years as a contracts attorney, dissecting clauses, anticipating loopholes, and understanding the precise weight of words. I understood these words perfectly. This was a termination clause. I smiled. It was a small, genuine smile of relief. I see, I said. Well, that certainly simplifies things. I turned, picked up the grocery bags, and placed them on the counter. You'll need these. Then I walked past them, toward the stairs leading to my bedroom. I'll pack. The drive away from the house an hour later was surreal. I had a single suitcase in the back of my car, the same one Eleanor and I had used for our trip to Italy after I retired. I'd packed methodically. 3 changes of clothes, my toiletries, the framed photo of Eleanor from my nightstand, my laptop, and a thick folio containing every important financial document I possessed. It was the folio of a man preparing for a strategic dissolution, not the sentimental baggage of a man cast out. As the familiar neighborhood faded in my rearview mirror, I didn't feel grief. I felt analytical. I began a mental audit, a long overdue accounting of my life since Eleanor passed 5 years ago. The numbers scrolled through my mind with chilling clarity. Medical school tuition for Clara, $412,000. The wedding at the country club, $78,000. The down payment on the failed condo, $60,000. The monthly mortgage payments on my own home, which they treated as rent-free lodging, $3,800 for 36 months. That was $136,800. Car payments, insurance, groceries, their phone bills. The grand total was staggering, a monument to my own willful blindness. I had been funding a lifestyle, not supporting a family. I had been an investor with no returns, a bank with no terms. I found a clean, anonymous motel off the interstate, 20 miles away. It had beige walls and a faint smell of disinfectant. It was perfect. It was a blank slate. I paid for a week in cash, checked in under my own name. There was no need for subterfuge yet, and set up my laptop on the small desk. The first night, I slept more soundly than I had in years. There were no footsteps overhead from Mark's late-night gaming sessions, no passive-aggressive notes left on the refrigerator about the kind of milk I'd bought. There was only quiet. The next morning, I began my work. My career had been built on precise language and the unwavering logic of consequence. I was about to apply that skill set to my personal life. I opened the folio. My first call was to the bank that held the mortgage. I was the sole name on the loan. "I'd like to cancel all automatic payments, effective immediately," I told the representative. I gave her my authorization codes. It was done in 90 seconds. My second call was to my insurance broker. I owned the 2 cars they drove. The policy was in my name. "I'm selling 2 of my vehicles," I explained calmly. "I need to remove a 2022 SUV and a 2021 sedan from my policy. I also need to remove Clara and Mark as listed drivers." There was a pause. The broker knew my family. "Everything all right, Arthur?" he asked. "Everything is becoming all right, Jim," I replied. "Send me the confirmation, please." The third call was to American Express. Clara was an authorized user on my Platinum card, a privilege she extended to Mark without my permission. They used it for everything from designer clothes to their thrice-weekly restaurant meals. "I'm reporting a card lost," I said, reading the number from my statement. "And I'd like to remove an authorized user from the account permanently." Another simple, clean amputation. The fourth call was to my estate lawyer. "Richard, it's Arthur. I need to come in and make some significant changes to my will and my life insurance beneficiaries. How's tomorrow morning?" Each call was a quiet, decisive click of a lock, securing a door they had long taken for granted. I felt no malice, no glee. I felt the profound satisfaction of setting a disordered system right. I was balancing the books. I had enabled this, and now I was disabling it. By the third day, the calls began. The first was from Clara, a single missed call in the afternoon, then another. By evening, it was a frantic volley of texts. "Dad, my card was declined at the salon. The insurance company sent a weird email. Why aren't you answering?" Mark's first communication was a text that simply said, "Call me. Now." It reeked of the same impotent fury he'd displayed in the kitchen. I archived it without reply. I let my phone go to voicemail, listening to the messages later with a detached curiosity. Clara's voice grew progressively more panicked and tearful. Mark's became a string of guttural, profane demands. They were like organisms in a petri dish, discovering their nutrient supply had been cut off, thrashing in confusion and rage. On the 5th day, they found me, and I was returning from a walk when their SUV screeched into the motel parking lot. Mark stormed out, his face a mask of fury. Clara scrambled after him, looking lost and afraid. He hammered on my door. I opened it calmly and stood in the doorway, blocking his entry. "What the hell is this?" he snarled, jabbing a finger at me. "You can't just cut us off. The mortgage payment is due. The car insurance is canceled. What are you playing at?" "I'm not playing at anything, Mark," I said, my voice level. "I am following your instructions. You gave me an ultimatum. Support your family under your rules, or get out." I got out. The financial arrangements that existed were part of my presence in the home. Since I am no longer in the home, the arrangements are concluded. Clara pushed past him, her eyes red-rimmed. "Daddy, stop this. This is insane. We didn't mean for you to actually leave. We were just upset. You know how Mark gets. Come home. We can talk about the loan." "There is nothing to talk about," I said, my gaze fixed on her. "You stood there and confirmed the terms. You made your choice. You chose us. Now you and Mark get to be us. My support was conditional on a level of respect that no longer exists." "Respect?" Mark barked a laugh. "You're an old man living off his pension. We were doing you a favor, letting you stay with us." "Letting me stay?" I allowed a moment of silence to hang in the air. "Mark, the deed to that house is in my name. The mortgage is in my name. The property tax is paid from my bank account. You are not my landlords. You are, in the legal sense, tenants at sufferance, and your tenancy is over." The color drained from his face. Clara began to sob. "You can't do this to us. To your own daughter. Where will we go?" "You are both adults," I said, my voice softening slightly for her, but my resolve unshaken. "You will figure it out, just as you were so confident you could figure out a boutique coffee roasting business." I looked at my watch. "I have a meeting to get to. This conversation is over." I closed the door on their stunned faces, the click of the lock echoing the calls I had made days before. My meeting was with my old friend Richard, my lawyer. But before that, I had a chance encounter that changed the entire trajectory of my plan. In the lobby of Richard's building, I ran into a man named George, a former colleague from my firm who now worked in risk assessment for a major bank. We exchanged pleasantries, and he asked what I was doing there. "Just updating some estate planning," I said. George lowered his voice. "Good. You need to be careful. In fact, it's a funny coincidence running into you. Your son-in-law Mark, right? He was trying to secure a line of credit with us last month. Used your property as potential collateral. A cold stillness washed over me. I didn't authorize that." "I know," George said, his eyes conveying a grim understanding. "The paperwork he submitted was creative. He was trying to use a forged power of attorney. We flagged it as attempted fraud and denied it immediately, of course. We didn't file a report out of respect for you. Figured it was a family matter you'd handle. But Arthur, the kid is desperate. Our background check showed he's leveraged to the hilt. Looks like some heavy online gambling debts. The pieces clicked into place. The coffee business wasn't a dream. It was a desperate, flimsy cover for a hole he dug for himself. He wasn't just an entitled leech. He was a criminal. He wasn't trying to build a future. He was trying to steal mine to pay for his past. And his plan, I suddenly realized, was likely more insidious than just a fraudulent loan. He and Clara had been living in my house for 3 years. In our state, after 7 years of open and continuous occupation without permission, one could file a claim for adverse possession. He wasn't just living rent-free, he was playing the long game to steal the house itself. My meeting with Richard took on a new urgency. I was no longer on the defensive, simply severing ties. I was now on the offensive, protecting my assets from a clear and present threat. "We need to file a formal eviction," I told Richard after explaining the situation. "A 30-day notice to quit. We'll have it served by a sheriff's deputy. I want it official, documented, and undeniable." "That's aggressive, Arthur," Richard said, peering at me over his glasses. "His actions were fraudulent and predatory, Richard. My response will be proportional and legal." The eviction notice was served 2 days later. The explosion was immediate. I received a deluge of calls from family members, Clara's aunts, my cousins, all spouting a narrative I could immediately trace back to Mark. Arthur was having a breakdown. Arthur was losing his mind, becoming vindictive. Arthur was committing elder abuse against himself by cutting off his loving family. Mark's masterstroke of manipulation, however, came via a tearful call from Clara to her aunt, a notorious gossip. "We're so worried," Clara had wailed, a story I heard secondhand within hours. "And the stress, it's just, I think I might be pregnant." It was a disgusting, transparent ploy, a potential great-grandchild to be used as a human shield, a pawn to paint me as a monster throwing his pregnant daughter out onto the street. But they had miscalculated. They assumed I would react emotionally. They had forgotten that I was a lawyer. Emotion was a liability. Information was ammunition. I knew their smear campaign needed to be confronted not in private, but in the court of public opinion they had chosen to fight in. I found my opportunity a week later. I learned through a neighbor that Mark was holding a community support barbecue in the front yard of my house. He was playing the victim, grilling hamburgers on the grill I bought him, trying to rally the neighborhood to his side. I drove there. I didn't go to the house. I parked down the street and walked to where a group of neighbors, people I had known for 20 years, were gathered on the sidewalk, looking on with concern. I saw Bob, a retired police officer who lived across the street. "Arthur," he said, his face etched with worry. "We've been hearing some crazy things. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Bob. But I'm glad you're here." I spoke loudly enough for the others to hear, but my tone was conversational, not confrontational. "I'm sure you've all heard Mark's version of events." Mark saw me from the yard, and his face darkened. He started walking toward us, his jaw set. "Let me give you a slightly different version," I continued, my eyes on the approaching Mark. "The version with facts. For example, did Mark tell you that 2 months ago he was caught attempting to forge my signature on a power of attorney to secure a loan against my house? A loan not for a coffee business, but to cover over $80,000 in online gambling debts." A murmur went through the small crowd. Mark stopped dead in his tracks, his face turning ashen. "Did he tell you that my daughter, a doctor, has not contributed a single dollar to the mortgage, taxes, or utilities of the house she claims is hers in the 3 years she has lived there? Did he mention that I am not just their benefactor, but the sole legal owner of the property he is currently trespassing on?" I pulled a folded paper from my jacket pocket. It was a copy of the eviction notice. "This isn't a family squabble. This is a legal matter. I gave them a home and they tried to steal it. I gave them my support, and they saw it as an exploitable weakness." Mark found his voice, a weak, sputtering rage. "He's lying. He's a confused old man. He's confused enough to have the bank's fraud report, Mark?" I asked calmly. "Confused enough to have a copy of your credit report?" Shall we discuss the specific websites you frequent? Or maybe we can talk about your plan to claim adverse possession in another 4 years. He was speechless. The neighbors looked from me to him, their expressions shifting from sympathy to dawning comprehension and disgust. Mark's narrative had been built on lies, and I had just dismantled it with a few simple, verifiable facts. He turned and retreated back to the house, the screen door slamming behind him. The barbecue was over. I had won the information war. His next move was predictable. Intimidation. The following evening, my motel room phone rang. It wasn't my cell. It was the room's landline. No one had that number. "You think you're so smart," his voice hissed, distorted and low. "Old men can have accidents." "Old men fall," he hung up. I didn't call the police. I called Bob, the retired cop from across the street. I told him about the call. "He's desperate, Arthur." "Be careful," Bob warned, "and get a restraining order." A threat like that is actionable. He also mentioned something else. "By the way, my son is on the force." He said they responded to a wellness check at your house last night. A neighbor reported shouting. "Apparently, your daughter and Mark had a massive fight after you left the barbecue." He said she was packing a bag. The next day, armed with the threat and a sworn affidavit from George at the bank, Richard and I secured a temporary restraining order. Mark was legally barred from coming within 500 feet of me or my place of residence. The walls were closing in on him. The final collapse was swift and total. The eviction date arrived. When Mark and Clara weren't out, the sheriff escorted them from the property. They left with a few boxes of clothes in Clara's car. The SUV I had been paying for had been repossessed 2 weeks prior. A week after the eviction, I learned Mark had been fired from his latest part-time job after his employer found out about the attempted bank fraud. His creditors, no longer held at bay by the promise of a big loan, descended. His world, built on a foundation of my money and his lies, had completely imploded. It was then that Clara called me. She was alone, calling from a pay-as-you-go phone. She was crying, but it was a different kind of crying. The panic was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out shame. She told me she had left Mark. She told me he had fled the state to escape his debts. She told me the pregnancy had been a lie, a desperate final gambit concocted by him that she had shamefully gone along with. She was staying on a friend's couch. She had nothing. "I'm so sorry, Daddy," she wept. "I was weak. I was a coward. I let him poison everything. I chose him over you, and it was the worst mistake of my life." I listened. I didn't offer comfort or absolution. When she was finished, I spoke. "I believe you are sorry, Clara. But sorrow is a feeling. Atonement is an action." I laid out my final, non-negotiable terms. It was the most difficult contract I had ever drafted. "You betrayed me publicly, with our family and our neighbors. Your apology must be equally public. You will write a letter to the editor of the local paper. You will post a full and honest accounting of your actions on your social media. You will stand up in front of our church congregation, and you will tell them the truth. You will tell them what Mark did, what you allowed him to do, and the lies you told to support him. You will spare no detail, and you will take full responsibility." She was silent for a long time. "And if I do all that, can I come home?" "No," I said gently. "The home is the source of the poison. It represents money and entitlement. It's what he wanted and what you were willing to sacrifice me for. So I'm taking it off the table. I'm donating the house, fully paid off, to a foundation that provides housing for wounded veterans, a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line." She finally understood. This wasn't about punishment. It was about purification. Any reconciliation between us could not be tainted by financial need or the prospect of an inheritance. It had to be real. It had to be earned. I want a relationship with my daughter, I finished. But I will not have a dependent. If you do this, if you take these steps to publicly reclaim your integrity, we can talk about what a new beginning looks like. The choice, once again, is yours. 2 Sundays later, I sat in the back pew of the church Eleanor and I had attended for 40 years. Clara walked to the lectern. She was pale and thin, but her voice when she spoke was clear and steady. She confessed everything. She told the story of their greed, of Mark's deceit, of her own complicit silence and manipulation. She exonerated me completely and publicly shouldered her own blame. She didn't make excuses. She didn't ask for pity. She simply told the truth. People stared. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others nodded with a sad understanding. When she was done, she walked back down the aisle, not looking at anyone, and left the church. The epilogue of our lives began that day. Mark was never seen again, a ghost consumed by his own deceptions. The house, my former home, is now a bustling, happy place called Eleanor's house, home to 3 veterans and their families. Its history has been cleansed by a nobler purpose. My life is quiet now. I have a small apartment overlooking a park. My finances are my own. My peace is my own. Clara is rebuilding her life from the ground up. She took a job as a resident at a clinic 1,000 miles away, working with underserved communities. She sends me letters, not texts. Long, thoughtful letters written by hand. We haven't seen each other since that day in church. But last week she wrote something that felt like the first solid step on a long road back. I finally understand, she wrote. You didn't just teach Mark a lesson. You taught me one. Respect isn't something you're given. Dignity isn't something you can inherit. They're things you have to build yourself, every single day. Thank you for making me start my own construction. I folded the letter. For the first time since this began, I felt a pang of something other than resolve or relief. It was a fragile, tentative sprout of hope. The contract had been fulfilled. The terms had been met. The damages had been paid. And now, perhaps, the negotiation for a new relationship could finally begin.